There is much still unexplained in this world. Many age-old tales of creatures hidden in the dark corners of human history. Bloodsuckers, shapeshifters. Today we dismiss them as myth. Vampires, werewolves, the stuff of science fiction and horror movies. But what if there is something behind all these stories? What if these creatures are real?
I know for a fact, because I am a werewolf, that werewolves exist. If werewolves exist, then vampires must exist too.
We'll explore the dark side of history to find out where vampires and werewolves may have come from.
In the history of Transylvania was a really, really bad guy. Vlad the Impaler.
And discover through eyewitness accounts what they're reported to be like.
Werewolves didn't just bite you, they ripped you to shreds.
We'll use the latest scientific techniques to try to understand how these creatures might function.
What is the biology of an animal that actually survives in blood?
And we'll encounter modern-day members of the vampire and werewolf subcultures, those who can shed some light on the reality of the undead.
It's very hard to go to a bar and just shut up someone and go, oh, by the way, do you bleed nicely?
Look closely at the person sitting next to you. Are they really what they seem? Or could they be members of a secret underworld, an actual werewolf or vampire?
I looked up and I saw a tall, dark figure, and all of a sudden, it just wasn't there.
This is a journey into the shadows as we probe the reality of Fang versus fiction. Most of what we know, or think we know, about werewolves and vampires comes from movies and novels, the realm of fantasy. We dismiss these creatures as colorful figments of our imagination, or frightening characters in our nightmares, and nothing more. But werewolves and vampires have been reported in nearly every culture. Stories from separate continents and time periods are eerily similar, and sightings persist today, from the mountains of Eastern Europe to the hidden corners of America.
Our records of vampires go back as far as we have records. In the ancient Greek times, ancient Middle East, there are stories of vampires that emerge as soon as we started writing down things.
J. Gordon Melton is the author of the Encyclopedia of the Undead.
In Japan, the vampire character is called a kappa, Romania Moria, whereas in Greece, Verolokos.
Idea of the vampire goes back as far as anybody knows, to the dawn of our written history in any event.
Daniel Cohen has written several books about these creatures.
In that you have a spirit or a being out there that sucks the life out of people.
Another legend as old as humankind tells of the ability of someone especially gifted, or cursed, to transform themselves into a wolf. Brad Steiger wrote the Werewolf book. He has spent a lifetime studying the phenomenon.
The concept of shape-shifting is universal. There's not a culture that anthropology can name where shape-shifting does not occur.
In northern Thailand, there is the Tor. In Navajo culture, the Skinwalker. In Italy, the Benedanti. As for vampires, one of the earliest tales dates to the Babylonian civilization, thousands of years ago. The Edimu was said to be a troubled soul that could not rest. It wandered the earth searching for victims whose veins it sucked. The Babylonians also took care not to offend the demon, Lilitu, who was called Lilith by the ancient Hebrews.
Lilith is, in apocryphal lore, Adam's first wife. And because of disappointment in love, was turned into a creature an angry spirit that killed children.
She is the succubus that seduces young men as they sleep. She is the vampire that takes the breath of young babies and adults as well.
One of the first recorded instances of werewolfism in Western history involves a ruler described in Greek mythology, King Lycaon of Arcadia.
The specific story of the werewolf goes back at least to Greek times, the story of King Lycaon, who Zeus visited him in human form and Lycan had the very bad taste to serve him human flesh at a banquet, which, you know, Greek gods got rather fussy about that sort of thing. He changed him into a wolf. That's the original lycanthrope.
In honor of Lycan, scientists name the syndrome lycanthropy, and modern-day werewolves are often called lycanthropes, or lycans for short. Early descriptions of the condition date back to 700 AD.
By the time you get to the Romans, there are werewolf stories about, you know, somebody seeing his friend change into a wolf and then be wounded, and then he found his friend later in a human form with the same wound on it. These stories are common in Roman times, almost, and they have a very modern ring to them.
The term werewolf itself comes from the Old English word for man, ver. It may have been coined by early travelers to Ireland who insisted that they had met entire families of werewolves and witnessed individuals transform themselves into wolves.
At the time of St. Patrick, you know, that he didn't drive out the snakes, he drove out the werewolves. And there were many accounts that Ireland was the land of the wolves.
Elsewhere in Europe, stories circulated of corpses rising from their graves at night to prey upon the living. Villagers at the time reported opening caskets and finding preserved bodies that seemed to be in perfect health.
Sometimes when they uncovered the body after several months, it looked just as alive as it had been when it was buried. The flesh was still there, the color was still there. There might even be fresh blood on the mouth area. Hair would seem to have grown, the nails would have grown, and there was an understanding that maybe this body was still somewhat alive.
British chroniclers named this type of living dead cadaver sanguisicus, Latin for blood-sucking corpse.
Maybe it had gotten up and walked around, and maybe this blood didn't come from the inside, but this creature had been drinking blood.
Yeah, from Britain, there are a number of tales of blood-sucking or at least, you know, very dangerous corpses that will, you know, get up and chase you around and so forth.
By the 14th century, vampirism was widespread, especially in the mountainous regions of Eastern Europe. Hungarians called a restless corpse Nosferatu, which meant the undead, while the Slavs called it upir, from which our modern term vampire is derived.
He is a thing that is dead and yet moving. He is, or she is, an animated corpse and being kept alive in this, or be kept animated in this half-life state by blood or by some other essence that they manage to get out of the living.
Romanians in particular have a long history of encounters with the undead. Local villagers still fear the strigoi, an evil creature who sleeps during the daylight hours, flies at night, can change into animal form, and sucks the blood of sleeping children. Vampires must hunt in order to survive. As the Bible says, for the blood is the life. But lycans kill indiscriminately, not just out of hunger. It was said that they would attack whomever was unlucky enough to cross their path.
Werewolves didn't just bite you, they ripped you to shreds. They ate you.
You can't emphasize enough how fearful people really were of the werewolf and of how dangerous it could be.
Medieval scholars studying these creatures concluded that the werewolf could move about during the day, but vampires were restricted to the night.